What's up, everyone? My name is Jonathan. Thank you for joining me for a video here today. I appreciate your time. Today, we are going to edit this photo and turn it into this photo. This lizard was taken in Hawaii. I don't remember exactly where, but we were on Kona, so out while we were on a hike. So let's jump right in. So first, I want to kind of look at the image and figure out what exactly I want to do. So I'm probably going to want to separate the subject, which is the lizard, from the background quite a bit, and then also kind of really darken, add a not a vignette. I'm not a super big fan of just actual circle vignettes, but basically that's what we'll be doing, and then kind of isolate the subject a little bit more and draw your eye to the subject, and then we'll look at some cropping options when we get that far. So we're going to start. The highlights look good. There's no highlights, obviously. There's no highlights whatsoever. The blacks are pretty black. That's probably going to be this area, but we're actually going to make that more black by the time we're done. So we'll just jump right in. I'm going to probably bring down the shadow some. Not super. I don't do a ton of global edits, global adjustments. I'll do this. Get the lizard looking the way I want. And then we're going to go do some masking. I really like how far the masking has come in Lightroom and in Adobe Camera Raw and Photoshop. All of them. We're going to do the subject. We'll see what it gives us. So it did okay. It's selected this part as well. We'll click this little button here so we can see what we're doing. I'm going to bring this over so I can see. And I'm just going to name this Liz. And then we are going to want to subtract from this mask and using a brush. We're going to erase all of this. Actually, I'm going to click off that for now. And just make sure that this is all gone. It is. And I actually did a pretty good job of erasing right along where the lizard is. So we are going to go up here and then we're going to click add. Same thing, add a brush. And we're just going to paint in. So now I am going to turn on auto mask because I want this to try to see the where we want the edge to be. So if you make this a little bit smaller, it is a little more persistent on where you're painting. And if we go too far, we can always just erase it. So just mask this guy in. Down here. See, you can see how it kind of went around right here. Kind of gave us a little bit of an edge. I'm going to feather this even more. Make the brush a little bit smaller. Because this is kind of, it was a pretty low aperture. I want to say this was 2.8. So yeah. So 2.8 for the aperture. So just the eyes are in focus. And then the rest of the body is pretty out of focus. So I'm kind of trying to represent that with the selection as well. A little bit more. And when we actually, I'm going to do that part last because I'm going to turn the auto mask off for that part. And then all I'm doing is hitting the space bar to move, bring up your hand tool and move around the canvas. We're just going to keep adding this in. I'm actually going to paint over where I want and then just erase it. It's really hard to make a corner with a circle brush. And something like that. And then something like that. Kind of hard to make a point with a circle brush, right? Make this harder. Auto mask. Kind of make sure we're not selecting the leaf. Although it shouldn't matter a ton. Because we actually will be. So this one, I actually want to paint more in here because I can see more on this leaf that I didn't erase. This a little smaller. Make sure we're really erasing all of the mask. Otherwise, it can kind of start to look funny. Okay, now we're going to go back over to, so this one was, we were adding, this one we are subtracting. So now I'm going to turn off the auto mask and make this pretty small and add a pretty good sized feather. And then paint right alongside the edge of the lizard's back here. That's probably a little too much, so we're going to erase that. There we go. It doesn't have to be perfect. Obviously, the better you do, the better it looks. That was this one. Yeah. Just paint this in. Although this doesn't look like. Yeah, I guess that is pretty close, huh? It just seemed like a very hard edge. Just paint over that. Go back to our... I'm just going to erase this. This feather a little bit smaller, a little bit harder. And then just go right along the edge of this. Kind of soften that edge some. Okay, so that's selected that guy. Then you can just hit Z to zoom in and zoom out. So that's that mask. So now we can edit the edit this as if we were editing just, it will only be making adjustments to the lizard. Going to bring up the exposure some, the whites quite a bit, the blacks, bring those down just a little bit, the shadows down some. I want to make him a little more yellow and a little more green versus magenta and blue. Add a little bit of saturation. We're going to add a little bit of texture. And a little bit of denoise just on him. And then back out. And now what we're going to do is we're just going to invert this mask. So we're going to right click. We're going to duplicate and invert. And now we're going to call this the background top. And we're going to intersect this mask with a linear gradient. So this will be basically creating another mask and only applying it to where we have selected. So we won't be selecting on the lizard. So we'll do a linear gradient and then drag down from like here, right about so. That way it's only going to be the top, basically, and around the lizard. So we're going to bring down the shadows, bring down the blacks, bring down the whites, and bring down the sharpness. And maybe a little bit more. I guess we'll bring down the overall exposure some. Did I do the highlights? I did. So we'll do the highlights, pretty much just crush the back. But I really like the way that looks. It really isolates the lizard from the back itself. And you can do like some dehaze to just kind of, or probably clarity would make more sense here. That will obviously make it just a little more soft behind the lizard. And now we're going to do the exact same thing. So we're going to duplicate and invert the mask. We are going to call this one background bottom. And then we're going to right click, intersect mask with linear gradient, and we're going to drag up from the bottom. Just to make sure it doesn't go on the lizard when we do this. The top was more important to do that than the bottom, obviously, but we can have these overlap a little bit. We're going to do a lot of the same things we just did. We're going to bring down the highlights, the shadows, the whites, and the blacks. But I don't like how this leaf is kind of wrinkled and all the light was coming from this side. So this is really well lit and this is not. So I'm actually going to just paint in right here another mask on top of this. Or actually I'll probably, yeah, we'll try just doing a brush. And make it pretty big. Just paint in right here. So I really want to fill that spot in, but it doesn't look like that's going to happen. We're going to erase. Super soft. And I want to erase this back down here. Turn this off. Yeah, I don't know if it's going to cover up the way that I want to. Don't click this because then you just erase all of your stuff. So what we're going to do is do a radial gradient instead. We're going to paint this right here. Turn this. Make this pretty big. So it's going to be really soft, hopefully. And then bring down the blacks. And the whites. And the shadows. And a little bit more. Yeah. It's probably good. I wish I could get that to be even, but it just does not want to be even. But I guess if it was real life, it probably wouldn't be a straight line either. So. That's unnecessary. See what happens if we just bring down the exposure. Do the same thing? Does the same thing. That brings it up a little bit more, but that's very black. Very black, but that doesn't look bad. That's kind of the look we were going for anyways. So now we're going to go back to our edit panel. And we are going to bring up the blacks some, just so everything isn't quite so black. You'd have to bring it up a ton to get away from the blacks, but that's kind of the point of the photo, was to just really isolate the lizard. Oh, there was one more thing I wanted to do. So we're going to grab another radial gradient. You can do that by hitting Shift M, and that adds another radial gradient. I'm actually going to hit Z and move over here to the eye. I wanted to add a little bit of a gradient right here on the eye. Put that right there. And not the exposure. I'm actually just going to bring the highlights all the way up. I want to make this a little bit bigger. I really want his eyes to really shine. Maybe we'll bring the shadows down. Yeah. See what doing the blacks does. So that looks good right there, I think. You can actually see the leaf reflecting in his eye. And same thing over here. So Shift M to create another radial gradient. And we're going to do the same thing on this side. Although it's not going to be as pronounced because the light was coming from this side. And don't want that. We're going to bring the highlights all the way up. Actually, probably could bring this up some. Maybe get a little bit of more light out of it. But we are going to bring the blacks down a little bit. That looks good. Well, let's add some denoise to just the eyes. And we'll go back to the other one. Do the same thing on this side. And I think that's it. So now we're going to go down here. We're going to go to our hue and saturation and luminance tabs. We're going to go to our saturation. We're going to bring up the green some. And the blues, because the blue you can see it's affecting around his eye. So we're going to bring that up some, and we're going to go to the luminance tab, and we're also going to bring up those just a little bit. And the aqua does kind of like weird things to his scales. So I'm not going to even do anything with that. I just want the blue to be a very rich blue. So we'll do something like so, and then we're done with that tab. So here, because he's pretty much just in the highlights, so I could go to the highlights, and then if you can't see these, it's because you don't have this little checkbox or little drop down. So this will really help you pick what you're trying to pick. So I'm going to go to a green, bring up the saturation some. And that's a very, like, I can see it on my screen. You might not be able to see it. There's just the most slight difference there. It's actually getting rid of some of the blue that's in his scale or skin. Yeah, I guess they don't have scales, huh? Well, let's just call that good. Sharpening, I'm going to hold Alt while we're clicking on the slider and bring that all the way up to like here. Basically, probably just a little bit. And then noise, there was quite a bit of noise in this image, so we're going to bring this pretty high up. So I did something funky to his skin. Must have been when we were in here. Okay, so it was the saturation on for his, the blues. I betcha. Well, I would like to make his eyes look a little more blue, but unless we go to Photoshop, then I don't think that's going to happen. So we can try this now. Really affects his face where those little blue spots are. But we'll call that good. And then only one more thing. Oh, I guess I should need to check these. So that actually brightened the photo up a little bit. Close that down, don't need this, don't need that. And then usually slide probably this just a little bit this way. This just a little bit this way. And this just a little bit that way. And shouldn't need to mess with this. That just makes all of that look super weird. Bring the saturation up. You can see what that's affecting. So it's affecting the green primary, as you can see. So if we were to bring this down, bring this up, that looks kind of weird. So it's changing all of the green. So it's going to affect more than just green because it's shifting the hue of these two there. So it's not just affecting, it's not the same as the hue and saturation sliders where it's only affecting that color. It's actually shifting all of the colors. So if obviously it takes red, green, and blue to make all the colors. So it's shifting all of the greens. So everything that has green in it, blue has green in it. So it's going to shift even those. And we'll call that good. And then we'll look at some cropping. Might do a 1:1 and then do just the more square look. I really like the square look on this guy specifically, just because we're going to put his eyes right in the middle of the frame this way, side to side, and then I put his head right just below the 1/3. Kind of like put it kind of like so. So now that we've done that, I might even make these a little more pronounced because now that we've cropped so much out of it, at least the bottom, we can actually darken this more since it seems to have we really cut out a lot of the darkness, so it's not really pulling us up to the lizard like it was originally. So we're going to do something like that, a little bit darker. That looks good. I think I'm going to add a little bit more noise reduction. This image got really noisy really fast. So quite a bit, but it still looks good. All right, and that is editing the lizard photo from Hawaii. If you learned something, leave a comment down below. If you see something that would make my workflow a little bit faster. I greatly appreciate all suggestions and all your comments. Thank you so much for watching. God bless. Stay safe out there and have a great day.